Harrison Ford, a name that echoes through Hollywood like a legend carved in stone, the guy who carried whole galaxies as Han Solo and turned adventure into something unforgettable. With Indiana Jones, he's the face of courage, the pulse of dreams for an entire generation, a man who made us believe heroes could beat anything. That gritty voice, those piercing eyes, that undeniable presence, they're etched into the soul of cinema, and no amount of time could ever dim the fire he sparked in our hearts. But behind the epic titles like Han Solo or Indiana Jones, there's a guy who's walked through storms that would crush most people. Harrison Ford climbed out of the wreckage of broken marriages. He carried the heavy pain of watching his daughter fight epilepsy's cruel hold. He survived a terrifying plane crash that left scars he'll carry forever. Every mark on his body or heart tells a story of battles no fame could shield him from. Yet, like the heroes he played, Ford stood back up, scarred but never beaten. He's got the spirit of a man who refuses to let tragedy win. And now at 83, the question cuts deep. Is there still a hidden sorrow? What pain haunts this legend? In the final pages of his story, before we dive in, hit that like button to honor a man who gave us timeless heroes and still fights battles no camera ever caught. There was a time when Harrison Ford's biggest fight wasn't against bad guys or empires, but the quiet weight of his own childhood, a silence that almost buried him before he could ever step onto a stage. His story started far from Hollywood's bright lights in Chicago on July 13th, 1942. Born to a family with art in their blood, his dad Christopher dabbled in acting. His mom Dorothy sang on the radio. It seemed like Ford was meant for the spotlight, but the kid who'd one day rule galaxies as Han Solo and redefine heroes as Indiana Jones grew up wrestling something much tougher, a shyness so heavy it felt like a cage. Years later, he'd say with raw honesty, "I was a super shy kid. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere." By age 10 in the early 1950s, that shyness had dug deep. With a Jewish mom and an Irish Catholic dad, he got a mix of strength and restlessness, like he never quite fit in any world. He'd stand on the edges of classrooms or playgrounds watching other kids connect while he stayed a ghost there, but unseen. That loneliness left marks, shaping a kid who knew silence better than joy. But even in those quiet shadows, something adventurous was growing. At 13, as a Boy Scout, he found freedom in nature, the rustle of trees, the calm of lakes, the endless sky. It was an escape the classroom never gave him. Those moments hinted at the passion that'd later pull him into plane cockpits, chasing that same freedom. But back in school, the cage of shyness snapped shut, reminding him he was still trapped inside himself. As a teenager, the struggle got sharper. Teachers saw him as the kid with bad grades, low confidence. By the time he hit Ripon College in Wisconsin around 18 in the early 1960s, the pattern was set. Studying philosophy, he felt like he was sinking. He'd later admit his grades were so bad he almost flunked out. Wandering those college halls, feeling lost, invisible, the same old shadows haunting him. "I wasn't a good student," he said. "I didn't feel like I fit." The guy who'd inspire millions as a symbol of guts seemed back then, like he was losing. Then in his final year at Ripon, something clicked almost by chance. He took a drama class, not because he dreamed big, but because he was desperate to break free from his silence. What started as a shaky step lit a spark on stage. Nervous but determined, he found a voice buried under years of fear. For the first time, the kid no one saw felt noticed, and the world started to hear him. The pain of those early years, the isolation, the feeling of not belonging, didn't just vanish. It built something tough. Every line he'd later speak, every bold role he'd take, carried echoes of that childhood fight. The world would know him as a fearless hero, but only he knew the real victory started way before the cameras. In the quiet, painful battle to escape his own silence in 1964, at just 22, Harrison Ford rolled into Hollywood with an old car, a faint hope, and a dream that the city might see him. Columbia Pictures gave him a contract for $150 a week. It felt like a golden ticket for a second, but the truth hit hard. His roles were nothing, tiny parts that vanished before the credits. The kid who fought childhood silence now faced a worse kind Hollywood's silence of being nobody. Years later, he'd talk about the sting of auditions where they'd size him up and dismiss him before he even spoke. I'd walk in, and they'd decide I wasn't right before I said a word, leaving those rooms already beaten hurt more than any rejection letter. Hollywood didn't care about the invisible. That same year, he married Mary Marquardt. By his mid-20s, he wasn't just a dreamer chasing a role, he was a husband. Soon a dad to two kids. Fatherhood warmed his heart, but it also weighed him down. Dreams didn't pay for diapers or rent. By his late 20s, life was a brutal cycle: auditions all day, rejection at night, and the heavy look in his kids' eyes asking questions he couldn't answer. Out of need, he turned to carpentry, teaching himself to cut and shape what he'd later say, with a bitter edge. Carpentry paid the bills, but killed the spirit. Every table he built felt like a grave for the dream that brought him to LA. As the early 1970s hit, Ford was in his 30s, watching friends become stars while he stayed a shadow in the city of lights. I felt like a failure, he'd admit, like I had no business being an actor. The hammer in his hand got heavier, not from the wood, but from the weight of responsibility. Every look at his kids was love and pain, a reminder of his duty, and the nagging question, could he keep them safe while chasing a dream that wouldn't have him? The guy who'd play unbreakable heroes felt like the weakest man, and yet in his workshop among sawdust and despair, something refused to die. Building furniture for Hollywood's big shots kept him close to the world that rejected him. He wasn't on set with a blaster or whip, he was fixing doors, sanding chairs, but his eyes held a spark no rejection could snuff out. He could hide his hope, but he couldn't kill it. By 1973, at 31, fate cracked the door open. George Lucas gave him a small part in American Graffiti, a tiny role, but a huge sign. He wasn't meant to fade away. Still, the years until 1976 were a grind. Between wood and film, survival and destiny, every rejection, every heartbreak, every splinter was forging a man too tough to ignore. Harrison Ford was still a nobody to Hollywood, but in the fire of despair, a legend was quietly taking shape. From the ruins of rejection, fate finally showed up. And it came in a weird way: a carpentry gig in the mid-1970s. Ford, now in his early 30s, was sanding wood for Hollywood insiders when he crossed paths with a young director, George Lucas. It started as a job fixing stuff, but turned into a wild chance to read lines for a quirky space movie nobody thought would hit big. Ford walked into that audition not as a star, but a carpenter needing to pay bills. He walked out as Han Solo with Star Wars in 1977. The carpenter was gone. A legend was born overnight. Ford's smirk, his strut, his vibe became the soul of rebellion across galaxies. The invisible guy was finally seen, but the irony was harsh. The spotlight that saved him left him no place to hide, showing him to a world that only wanted the myth, not the man. Then lightning hit again in 1981. Raiders of the Lost Ark burst onto screens, and Ford, with a whip and fedora, rewrote adventure for generations. Indiana Jones wasn't just a role, he was a game changer, a figure burned into the 20th century with Han Solo and Indiana Jones. Ford didn't just carry films, he carried entire legends. But he knew the cost. You don't walk away from those roles, he'd say. They follow you everywhere. The parts that made him untouchable also tied him down, huge shadows, sometimes hiding the man underneath. Still, he refused to be trapped by blockbusters. In Blade Runner in 1982, he carried the heavy sadness of a guy questioning what it means to be human. In Witness in 1985, his quiet strength got him an Oscar nod, showing there was a real actor under the action hero. In The Fugitive in 1993, he turned desperation into defiance. In Air Force One in 1997, he was America's grit, commanding the screen with a power that felt bigger than fiction. Each role stacked up, building not just a career, but a kingdom of emotion and myth. The wins brought crazy rewards, from $10,000 for the first Star Wars to $65 million for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. His paychecks matched his film's massive reach. By the 1990s, his movies had made over $9 billion worldwide, making him one of the richest, most bankable stars ever. The shy kid who felt out of place now stood as a pillar of cinema, a name forever And yet, under the roar of applause, the silence crept back. Fame lifted him higher than he dreamed, but it became a mask he couldn't take off to the world. He was invincible. Han Indy, the president, the fugitive, always dodging death, but in the quiet, Ford faced a harder truth. He'd become more symbol than man. The spotlight gave him immortality, but stole his peace, the calm every person craves. So the cruel twist of his life hung around Harrison Ford. Conquered the world, but in doing so, he became something even he couldn't escape. Myths once born don't get to die. Fame made him a legend, but it also broke the quiet of his personal life. The guy the world loved as Han Solo came home each night to a marriage cracking under his success. Mary Marquardt, the woman who held him through the lean years, watched helpless as the family she built started to fall apart. When Harrison married Mary in 1964, he was no star, just a 22-year-old dreamer, barely getting by. Mary believed in him when no one else did. She worked, kept their home together, bore the weight of poverty with quiet strength. Watching him come back from failed auditions with defeated eyes, she stuck through the years when carpentry paid the bills. When even he doubted acting was worth it. For over a decade, she was his safety net, catching him when the world let him fall. But in 1977, Star Wars exploded, and overnight the nobody became a face every corner of the planet knew. To millions, Ford was a hero of grit and rebellion. To Mary, he was a stranger stolen by the world. She'd shared him with failure. Now she had to share him with fame, and fame doesn't play nice nights. Got longer, distance grew, intimacy faded into silence. You don't walk away from those roles, Ford would say, but Mary knew too. Well, he wasn't just slipping from roles, he was slipping from her. Then came the rumors, brutal in their timing, whispers of an affair with Carrie Fisher, the princess on screen, and maybe briefly in life, spread like cracks in thin glass. Whether true or not, for Mary, it was a cut deeper than betrayal. It was realizing the dream she fought for had turned on her. She'd survived his obscurity, but couldn't survive his legend. By 1979, the marriage was done. 15 years of love ended not with fights, but with silence, the kind that breaks kids' hearts. Their two sons, Ben and Willard, saw their family split under Hollywood's glare. To them, the dad the world cheered was also the dad who couldn't keep their home together. For Mary, it was heartbreak with no audience, grief hidden. While the world celebrated her husband's rise, Ford rarely spoke of Mary later, maybe because every memory was a mirror showing the man she believed in and the one who let her go. Behind Han Solo's swagger and Indiana Jones's grit lies a quieter truth. His first big love was sacrificed for fame. It's the hard paradox of Harrison Ford's life. He ruled galaxies on screen, but at home, he lost the fight that mattered most. Fame took his first love, but the toughest chapters were still coming. After his divorce from Mary Marquardt, he found comfort with Melissa Matheson, a talented screenwriter who gave the world E.T., a story about connection, loss, and longing for home. If Mary was the partner of his lean years, Melissa was the partner of his glory. In 1983, they married, and for a bit it felt like Ford had a shot at peace. Their home rang with the voices of two kids, Malcolm and Georgia. For a moment, the guy shaped by loneliness found the joy of belonging, but shadows moved in fast. Their daughter, Georgia, got epilepsy, and with it came a pain no fame or money could block. Ford, the guy who played unbeatable heroes, was helpless against his daughter's seizures. Friends said he'd go quiet when talking about her illness, like words couldn't carry that kind of pain. In desperation, he auctioned his iconic Han Solo jacket, a symbol of his biggest win, to fund research for a cure to the world. It was a generous move to Ford. It was a father begging, trading stardom for his daughter's health. Melissa carried the pain differently. A mom first, she guarded George's fragile health even as her marriage started to crack under Ford's absences and fame's endless demands. Friends admired her quiet strength, her refusal to air her pain, yet behind that strength was loneliness. A woman watching her family unravel, carrying the weight of a sick child and the hidden hurt of living in the shadow of a man millions adored, but who was often gone. By the late 1990s, their marriage was breaking. Ford was a global icon, swallowed by films and sets. Melissa, brilliant in her own Wright grew more isolated, like she'd been written out of his story. In 2004. After over 20 years together, they divorced. The $85 million settlement made headlines, but the real cost wasn't in cash. For Melissa, it was the slow heartbreak of watching 20 years of love fade to silence. For Ford, it was another family broken, another reminder he could rule galaxies on screen, but not the fragile space of home. Their kids, Malcolm and Georgia, carried their parents' talent and the scars of a split family. But fate hit harder in 2015 when Melissa got neuroendocrine cancer. She was gone within months at just 65. By then, Ford was remarried. But the news gutted him. Reporters saw him go quiet, shrink inward. For Ford, Melissa wasn't just an ex-wife. She was the one who saw him go from struggling carpenter to global legend. The woman who raised his kids and shared his rise. Her death wasn't just a headline, it erased a piece of him. Friends said when Melissa died, Ford looked smaller, like grief had cracked his mythic armor. For a guy who'd survived crashes, broken bones, and wild stunts, this was a hit no heroism could dodge. The legend who cheated death on screen sat powerless before its reality years later. When asked about Melissa, Ford barely spoke, his words short, his pauses heavy, like every word risked reopening a wound. Those who knew him best said his silence spoke louder than words, the silence of a husband who'd lost twice, a dad who'd begged fate and lost, a man who knew some fights you can't win. The arc of Ford's life with Melissa wasn't Hollywood glamour. It was brutal trials, a daughter's illness, a marriage breaking under fame's weight, a death that made loss permanent to the world. He was the fearless hero inside. He was just a man scarred by grief, failure, and the hard truth that legends can't save the ones they love. In the end, what lingered was silence, the silence of a home once shared, of kids who lost their mom, of laughter that wouldn't come back, a silence Ford knew from childhood, the same heavy void he'd spent his life trying to outrun. But now in his later years, it came back sharper. Fame gave him everything. In Melissa's absence, it took everything away. Some loves last decades. Others burn quick, leaving echoes longer than their flame. For Harrison Ford, one of the quietest, most haunting chapters wasn't a marriage, but a secret 3-month fling with his Star Wars co-star Carrie Fisher. It started in 1976 on the set of a weird space movie nobody believed in. Yet amid the mess of costumes, rewrites, and late nights in London, Ford and Fisher fell into their own world. She was 19, sharp, brilliant, and painfully vulnerable. He was 34, weighed down by adulthood, a husband and dad with fame knocking at his door. On screen, they were Han and Leia, throwing quips and fiery looks. Off screen, the fiction spilled into reality. Their chemistry, the world would later love, wasn't all acting. For Ford, Carrie was an escape, laughter in the middle of heavy responsibilities, a spark against Hollywood's grind. And his crumbling marriage. For Fisher, Ford was a rock. She'd later write in her memoir, she was hooked on his steadiness, his mystery. Even knowing their fling couldn't last, it was wild, she said. But it was never meant to stay. Their secret burned for just 3 months, but its intensity made up for its shortness. Behind the cameras, they stole moments the world never saw, whispers in dressing rooms, glances that blurred play acting and truth. Fisher later wondered if some of those looks caught on film held more reality than performance. Both knew it'd end when filming stopped, when the set closed. So did their bubble. Ford went back to his life. Fisher drifted to hers, each carrying a piece of something unsaid, too fragile for the real world. The world didn't know. For 40 years, Fisher kept it quiet, maybe because it still stung, maybe because some truths belong in the dark. Only in 2016, months before her death, did she spill it. In her memoir, The Princess Diarist, she wrote not with anger, but with longing, like letting go of a ghost she'd held too long. Ford, true to form, said almost nothing. His silence was his confession, a quiet nod to what they'd shared. Then came the gut punch in December 2016. Carrie Fisher died suddenly at 60. For millions, it was losing Princess Leia, the rebel who taught generations to fight. For Ford, it was sharper, the loss of a woman who saw him not as a legend, but as a man. He said only a short statement. She was one of a kind, brilliant, original, funny, but those close to him saw the pain behind the words. Some silences hit harder than words, and Ford carried this, one like a wound that wouldn't heal. What made their fling unforgettable wasn't drama, but tenderness. Not forever, but its fire in Ford's life. Mary was his anchor in the lean years, Melissa his partner through triumph and pain. Carrie was something else, a reckless spark that burned bright, then faded, leaving only shadows. The world will always see Han and Leia as eternal lovers in a faraway galaxy. But for Ford, the story's heavier. For 3 months, fiction was real. When it ended, it left an ache that didn't break loud, but lingered quiet and endless. In his heart, his past was full of heartbreak, broken marriages, lost love, silences that never healed. But in the early 2000s, like fate got tired of kicking him, it gave Harrison Ford something new, not another storm, but a safe place. He found it in Calista Flockhart. They met in 2002 at a Golden Globes party, an unlikely spark. She was the sharp, witty star of Ally McBeal. He was the weathered legend carrying fame's weight and life's scars. Yet when their eyes met, it was simple, no act, no show. Ford would later say it wasn't her fame that pulled him in, but her kindness, her warmth, the way she made Hollywood's noise feel far away. Their love grew slow, quiet, away from cameras. By then, Ford was in his 60s, old enough to know the difference between a quick flame and a lasting one. With Calista, it was the lasting kind. Unlike his earlier marriages, they didn't have kids together, but family wasn't just blood. She brought her adopted son Liam, and Ford, scarred from messy fatherhood, took the boy as his own. It was devotion, not biology, that tied them. Friends saw Ford's rough edges softened, the restless guy settling into something calmer, a second shot at love and fatherhood built on choice, not chance. In 2010, they married in a small, quiet ceremony in Santa Fe. No cameras, no big show, just two people picking each other. Soon after, they settled on a Wyoming ranch far from Hollywood's chaos. Ford, who'd lived decades in the spotlight, chose the shadows of mountains, instead mornings on horseback, nights by the fire, Liam's laughter floating over the fields. These became his rhythm, a life shaped by presence, not premieres. Even when tough times came, they hit different. In 2015, when Ford's plane crashed, the world held its breath. Calista stayed by his side. Those weeks were about survival, not marriage, but her quiet, steady love stood out. When asked how she got through it, she said simply, "I love him." That's the heart of this chapter. For a guy whose earlier loves were scarred by absence, fame, and loss, Calista was something rare, presence, not a wild passion, not a ghost of regret, just a steady light warming the cold spots his past left behind. Today, their marriage is a Hollywood oddity, lasting, private, untouched by gossip. For Harrison Ford, Calista wasn't just a third wife. She was proof that even a beat-up legend can find calm waters, a place where the heart can finally rest. For years, Harrison Ford built his legend on being unbreakable, the guy who never stayed down, the smuggler who outran empires, the archaeologist who laughed at death with a whip and a grin. His body was his biggest ally, tough, restless, unstoppable. He was the picture of grit, a symbol of being untouchable. But legends live on screens, not in flesh. And flesh, no matter how strong, gives out. The betrayal started small, aches and bruises from years of stunts done out of pure stubbornness. Ford always refused stand-ins. If Indiana Jones was jumping off trucks or fighting on trains, it had to be him. Being real was his code. That grit won him the love of generations. But it left scars no camera saw: torn ligaments, cracked bones, muscles that healed wrong, but kept going. By his 70s, every step carried old fights, every breath showed the cost of not bending. Still, he pushed on. "I wanted it to be me," he said. "If the audience was gonna buy it, it had to be me." Then came June 2014, a day that broke the myth. On the set of Star Wars The Force Awakens, inside the Millennium Falcon, the ship that made him a legend, a hydraulic door failed and crashed down. It shattered his leg, pinning him under the icon that defined him. The crew froze, stunned. Han Solo, the guy who outran empires, broken not by blasters, but by steel. The set went quiet, production stopped, the myth lay hurt. Ford was rushed to surgery. He'd later laugh it off on TV, showing the accident with a toy model, but those who saw it never forgot the Irony stung the ship that made him eternal showed he could break for the first time the line between legend and man split open, and on the other side was just pain. Less than a year later, in March 2015, the myth cracked. More flying a vintage plane he loved. Ford hit engine failure. The plane crashed into a Los Angeles golf course. Wreckage twisted beyond recognition for minutes that felt like forever. The world thought it was over. News flashed had the unbreakable finally broken. Calista Flockhart, his wife, later said those hours were pure fear. I thought I'd lost him, she said, waiting outside the ICU. To the world, Ford's survival was a miracle. To Calista, it was a second chance, but it came with a cost. The guy who seemed forever young had faced death and came back changed. He recovered, walked, flew, returned to sets that demanded his sweat. But his eyes were different. Under the tough humor and shrugs was a new truth. For the first time, he had to face his body's limits. A body that jumped cliffs and dodged boulders was just human, fragile, breakable. What broke him wasn't just the crash or the door, it was knowing no legend can outrun time. For Harrison Ford, the guy who taught us to believe in heroes, that was the deepest cut of all. And his body wasn't done demanding. In 2021, at nearly 80, he tore his shoulder practicing a fight for Indiana Jones, and the Dial of Destiny production stopped for weeks as he went through surgery and slow rehab. The irony was brutal. Indiana Jones, the endless adventurer, undone not by traps or curses, but by age. When he got back, cameras caught the truth. His frame thinner, his steps slower, his face lined with wins and pain. Yet when the director yelled action, something sparked. Ford was Indy again, defying time. With every whip crack, every squint, he brushes off aging with a gruff laugh. It beats the alternative, but those close see the reality. Calista notices the stiffness when he stands, the careful steps, the pauses he never used to need at night. She hears him wake from old aches. Ford himself has admitted the bitter twist. The guy who played eternal youth now lives in a body that fails him daily. In 2023, when Indiana Jones 5 hit screens, audiences weren't just cheering a movie, they were saying goodbye to a man who gave his body bit by bit until it wasn't whole. Yet, that's what makes his story so human. The door that crushed him, the crash that nearly took him, the surgeries, the slow betrayal of time. They're not failures, they're sacrifices. Each scar shows a guy who didn't back down, who gave himself for his art and his fans. Where others stepped back, Ford stood taller, choosing to fight, even if the fight was his own body. In their Wyoming ranch, Calista sometimes watches him, older, slower, but still restless, and marvels at his fire. He doesn't know how to quit, she said. Maybe that's why we still love him. His fragility makes his strength shine brighter. This is the final chapter of the legend, not the smuggler who mocked empires, not the archaeologist who beat time, but the man who outlived his myths, carrying scars where others got cheers. His tragedies aren't just accidents, they're the slow surrender to age, the hard reminder that even heroes break. Yet Ford keeps going, not untouched, not unscarred, but unbroken in spirit. His body might fail, but his fire doesn't. And in that lies a different kind of forever. Maybe the real heroism was never about seeming unbreakable, it was about standing scarred and human and daring to keep moving. For those who grew up watching him leap, fight, and soar, seeing him stumble is tough, but in his stumbles, Harrison Ford gives us one last gift, a mirror of our own humanity, fragile, tough, unforgettable. At 83, Harrison Ford lives surrounded by wealth most can't imagine, but shadowed by aches, silences, and memories no money can erase. His net worth tops $300 million. His name sits on properties from LA's Brentwood Hills to a Manhattan penthouse, from his Wyoming ranch's wide skies to hangars with vintage planes and sleek jets he owns. Jaguars that hum with history, Mercedes built for speed, Teslas that glide quiet as Cessna. Sovereign worth more than most lifetimes. To the world, it's a picture of victory. The kid who built cabinets for rent now owns an empire. But those who know him see the irony. Harrison Ford has never lived smaller, quieter, more pulled back. In Wyoming, on that 800-acre ranch half donated to conserve nature, he picks quiet over flash. Hollywood's lights that once chased him now only flicker at rare premieres or red Carpets most days he's not a star, but a guy in boots walking the land, soaking in nature's rhythm, finding peace in its calm. He's built an empire, but craves less noise, less pressure, less acting. His home is with Calista Flockhart, the woman who's been by his side for over 20 years, and Liam, the son she adopted before him, a boy Ford took as his own. No kids came from this marriage, no new fatherhood to cover old regrets. Instead, there's a quieter redemption, dinners at the ranch, laughter by the fire. The feeling he's finally there after years of being gone through fame, films, broken families. He's learned to stay, to listen, to be. But even in this haven, his body speaks truths. At over 80, Ford carries the toll of 1,000 stunts and a few miracles. His leg still aches from the Millennium Falcon's door crushing him on